So my name is Kay, and I'm the group leader of Greater Aspect Indivisible Network, or GAIN. I want to thank you for coming this afternoon. Today, Mitch Cohen, an engineer and former head of the Northborough Select Board, among other positions, like I know that you're on the board of the library, Northborough, and other positions will present information about the federal defunding of our communities and what this means to our services and taxes. But first, I want to say a few words about the Supreme Court decision handed down yesterday. How many are aware of it? Okay. First of all, the Supreme Court chooses what cases they will hear, and out of thousands of them have repeatedly accepted cases whose decisions erode democracy, the rule of law, and expands executive power. And yesterday's decision was no different. The case regarding birthright citizenship has greatly eroded the ability of the lower courts to implement countrywide injunctions against Trump's initiatives and executive orders, which moves us closer to authoritarianism. In addition, experts like historian John Mitch tells us that this is the first step of eroding the 14th Amendment, ratified in 1868 and considered one of the most important amendments to the Constitution alongside the Bill of Rights. The 14th Amendment was instrumental in advancing civil rights and liberties for all Americans. It has been the subject of numerous Supreme Court cases which previously protected birthright citizenship, equal protection, and due process. This means that Trump, in 30 days, could begin not recognizing birthright citizenship in the 28 states not party to this specific case. I believe this court is radical and cannot be trusted to support what is in the best interest of all Americans, democracy, and the U.S. Constitution. So after today's meeting, please join us for an impromptu standout that Jim Miller has arranged for us regarding this court and these recent decisions in front of the old Northborough Town Hall to the right of CPS on Route 20 in Northborough. We can walk down or park in the Sawyer's parking lot to the right of the old Town Hall. I have posters if you need them. In addition, please check out our in-person meetings for GAIN and events on our Facebook page, including our July 17th Good Trouble rally in Northborough Common. I hope you can all come. Tell your friends, tell your family to please join us. Thanks again for being here. We truly, truly appreciate it. And now we will hear from GAIN member Mitch Cohen. Thanks.
Thanks, Kay. Cameron, here we are, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Maybe some good nods at the back of the room. As Stephanie described, the requested way to ask questions is to come up to this lower podium here because we've got the microphone. If you're not comfortable being on camera or you're unable to get up here for any reason, if you just don't want to, just raise your hand or yell out or anything like that. Feel free to ask questions anytime, and at the end, or both. Topic of the talk today is defunding of local government and what it means to the taxpayer. Another way to look at it is of the headlines that everyone sees and everyone, at least here, is worried about what they see in national news over the last 5 months. What does it mean locally? What does it mean to regular people in small towns and small cities around here? And I'm going to try to distill some of that and provide some local examples. So we'll go through some of the headlines, we'll go through a little bit of the impact to education, some impact to municipal government, impact to businesses, and to nonprofits. A little about myself and how I ended up here and part of GAIN. A lot of people have called me a local government nerd for a long, long time. I've been involved in local government in a number of official and unofficial capacities for, I guess, about 28 years since 1997. My wife Elisa and I lived in the town of Douglas for about 20 years, and I was on the school committee there for a couple of terms, including acting as chair for a while. I was on the select board, they called it the Board of Selectmen at that point. I was on the capital improvement committee for a long, long time. that's equivalent to what here in Northborough we call the Financial Planning Committee. It's a financial planning body for large capital projects. And I was on 2 school building committees there. In 2016, we moved to Northborough, and I didn't think I would be involved in local government at all. And my wife is kind of giggling at me because I probably even said that when we moved. But it turns out that I wanted to get to know Northborough, and the way I know how to get to know a town and meet new friends is through its government. So I informally joined some things, and then formally joined some things, and then a little over 3 years ago I was elected to the select board, where I served 3 years, a full term. I served as chair of the select board all 3 of those years, and recently, as of the most recent election, I opted to not run for re-election so I could spend more time working on issues like we're going to be talking about today. I've also served on the Fire Station Building Committee, the Easley School Building Committee, and I've been on the Library Trustees almost since right after we moved here to Northborough. I find local government a lot of fun. I do pay attention to state and national political news, but my passion is local. So immediately when I see something going on in the headlines, I immediately think about what's going to mean here, what's going to mean in Northborough Town Hall, or Shrewsbury, or Worcester, or statewide. And so I go to a lot of conferences about this stuff, the Massachusetts Municipal Association. I'm a very proud member of the Northborough Democratic Town Committee, as I was the Douglas Democratic Town Committee when we lived there, and to a lot of the state conventions as a delegate. I'm also a proud member of GAIN, as we mentioned earlier, with the Greater Essex Invisible Network, and by day I'm a mobile application developer. So I do all the local government stuff for free. It's fun. Yes, it's okay to laugh at that.
You are.
Thanks. Usual disclaimer, I'm not speaking on behalf of any committee, organization, employer, or client, and I always joke maybe not on behalf of my future self, because some of the things that I will say today will be wrong tomorrow. I've done my best to make all of the content of this accurate as of today. There is one item that changed when I woke up this morning, and I didn't change it so I can point that out, because things change rapidly. So let's go ahead and get started first on the topic of education. So I want to frame the education part of a little bit of recent past to set the stage for why changes might have a greater impact even than when they would if the pandemic and other things hadn't happened in the last few years. So the federal government provided a tremendous amount of funding to schools all over the country during the pandemic. There were 3 phases, all referred to as ESSER. I forget the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund. Ask me that in 5 minutes, I won't remember. But it was pretty close to $200 billion over 3 phases. And that went through state departments of education directly to school districts, and Northborough got a lot of that money. I'll talk about that on the next slide, but every school district in the country got a lot of money, and it was really helpful because they had some extra costs during the pandemic, and then as the pandemic started to end, if you will, that it became helpful to have some additional funding and do some new things, whether they be pandemic related or not pandemic related. But all of these grant funds always come with a drop-dead date for when you needed to finish spending the money. And that was just a few months ago. It was a few days after Trump took office. Coincidentally, January 28th of this year was when the last of the ESSER III funds needed to be spent by school districts. And these were all distributed through the U.S. Department of Education, which we'll certainly be talking about. So just for an example, for what Northborough got from the ESSER funds, was about $745,000. Northborough's school district, for those who aren't familiar, is split into two pieces. There's a K-8 that is just Northborough, and there's a 9-12 that's the Algonquin Regional High School. We have a high school jointly with Southborough. The numbers that I put on this slide are Northborough's proportionate share of that, just to focus in on one town. It's helpful. I mean, $745,000 over a few years. We did some good things with that. And by the way, if anyone wants any of this data, I'm happy to make this presentation available. I'll send anyone a PDF of it, and on my notes I put all of the links to where all this data came from and everything else. So, speaking of the Department of Education, so, you know, just in general, as I said, the money ran out. So, school districts already were having a hard time. All right, they built in some programs, some recurring costs. They had to figure out how to absorb because all these ESSER funds were disappearing. And so it was already a hard time, and then the president and the administration is making things a little bit harder at a really inopportune time. So January 20th, things start to happen. A couple of headlines here. Education Department to fire 1,300 workers, gutting its staff. And then Trump signs an executive order to begin eliminating the entire Department of Education. And that just really sucks, and I'll tell you why. So what is the Department of Education at the federal level? So schools are administered mostly locally. The states provide the vast majority of funding, and cities and towns provide the vast majority of funding. That proportion sort of differs state to state, but in Massachusetts, you know, it's probably on average about 30% from the state and 70% from the town. But there's a lot of variation and a lot of variation in different states. So most of the money to run the schools does not come from the federal level, but the federal level provides a lot of standardization and some really critical funding. So the Department of Education was formed in 1980. It existed before. It was a Health, Education, and Welfare Department, and it was split into thirds. I think that's at the tail end of the Carter administration, is when that occurred, if I'm remembering my dates correctly. And so, according to the Department of Education, their primary functions is supporting state and local education systems, as I mentioned, providing educational equity for all students, which I'll mention in detail in just a second, and provides a lot of grants and loans to higher education institutions. I'm not going to get into the higher education part of it. We're just talking about K-12 right now. So providing educational equity is really key to this whole thing. It's educational standards. It's not detailed curriculum, but it's a lot of information as to really what you should be teaching at the elementary level as you increase in grade, what you should be teaching in middle school, and what you should be teaching in high school. They let the specifics and the books and everything else up to the states and school districts, but that standardization is really important because people move between towns and move between states a lot. And it would be a real hardship if, say, you're in Massachusetts and then for a job you move to New York or California or Texas or somewhere else, and all of a sudden the kids there have learned something entirely differently. You know, in third grade they haven't touched multiplication yet, but they've done addition. I don't know, make something up. It's really important as people become more and more mobile for that national standardization. But it's not hardcore requirements, it's recommendations, but they're really important. They get very involved in the assessments and standardization of assessments there, again, to drive the consistency that they get. Promoting educational equity. This is huge, and this is one of the things that, probably the thing I'm most worried about in terms of the Department of Education being minimized or going away. So I'll read from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics website. All students, regardless of their personal characteristics, backgrounds, physical challenges, can learn mathematics when they have access to high-quality mathematics instruction. Equity does not mean that every student should receive identical instruction. Rather, it demands that reasonable and appropriate accommodations be made and appropriately challenging content be included to promote access and attainment for all students. That's huge. That comes really from federal law and the job of the National Department of Education. So they deal with that by mandating the rules around what are called 504s and IEPs. Those are two different ways of dealing with and helping kids that need a little extra help in different ways, but they provide that standardization and a really strict set of requirements. We'll talk about IEPs a little bit. In the Northborough K-8 system, about 23% of kids have IEPs, individual education plans. And those are in plans that require specialized instruction and specialized services that are tailored to a particular kid's needs. And a lot of people are surprised when they hear that it's up around 20, 23%. That's pretty standard. It's probably a little bit higher than the state average, but not a lot. And it's a little bit higher than national, probably because we spend more time in Massachusetts focusing on, okay, if someone's struggling, figure out why they're struggling, figure out how we can help them, which is what we really should do. But all of the laws and even some of the forms and everything else are driven at the federal level. At the Algonquin, which is, as mentioned earlier, the Northborough and Southborough, it's about 18% of students have IEPs. State average is just under 20%, the national average is about 15%. 504s, which you can kind of think about as a junior IEP, it's accommodations without specialized instructions. It's simply like, this kid needs a little bit more time on tests, but doesn't need to learn differently. That's a much smaller percentage, about 3.25% in Massachusetts. And nationally, I couldn't find the Northborough numbers for the 504s, but I'm sure they're out there. So what happens if the Department of Education goes away? There are no standards set at the national level. Every state has to figure it out. That's expensive. That's a lot of work that every state would need to do to come up with their own set of standardization. So every state and every citizen in every state would have to pay for that. They're all going to be different. Whether they're driven politically or just by science, they're all going to be different. And people moving state to state is going to be really hard. And a lot of people move state to state, even small regions. When we lived in Douglas, we knew a lot of people that lived in Rhode Island because it was 30 seconds away. And a lot of people would move state to state there. And that's not a big move by most standards. But all of a sudden, what happens if your kid who's more than 23% on an IEP, suddenly, we're not going to cover that. Or we're going to cover it entirely differently. And you're going to end up with a lot of lawsuits. There are already a lot of lawsuits around special education when parents rightly feel that their kid is not getting the appropriate services. Also, those standards are just crazy different in every state, and it'll take years to sort that out. That really, really worries me if the DOE goes away. A financial aspect of this is, one of them is Title I funding. Title I is financial assistance to districts with a high number or high percentage of children from low-income families. That's a pretty loose definition. Northborough isn't considered by most to have a lot of kids from low-income families, but we have enough that Northborough does qualify for Title I services and Title I money. We don't get a lot of money in comparison, so Northborough K-8 gets $68,000. Algonquin gets about $30,000. But it's gone to be good use. And kids, and it doesn't have to be the kids from the low-income families that get the extra services with this. It's any kid that needs a little extra help in math, maybe a little extra tutoring during the day or after school, a little help with reading, just to kind of get them back on track. A lot of kids take advantage of the Title I, even here in Northborough. Marlborough, which is a different socioeconomic city than Northborough, right over the border, gets over $1 million, $1.2 million. Wow. Worcester gets almost $15 million from the federal government in Title I services. And they need it. It's a city that has a higher percentage of low-income families. And low-income families typically require more education, so this provides that balance. So, all right, DOE goes away, and the president says, great, we're going to save a lot of money and leave it up to the states. Well, the states are going to, and the cities and the towns are going to figure out, all right, do we just do away with this? Or do we create our own system that's to replace Title I funding? Do we create our own thing? What are the rules? And the biggest thing is, how are we going to pay for it? Because it's not that the money that is saved is coming back into your pockets or just being sent to the states. It's being spent on other things like, tax refunds and lower taxes for billionaires and stuff like that. So it's not that, well, it's just going to come out of a different pie. And then you're going to have these different standardizations, and everyone's going to be fighting. It'll never get sorted out. It's really not a good situation. Another national system that we get for schools, which a lot of people don't think about but can really add up, is school-based Medicaid funding. So for families that are eligible for Medicaid, for one reason or another, the school districts are allowed to, and do because it's money they deserve, they go to the federal government and they fill out some forms and they get a check every year from Medicaid, federal Medicaid office, which is to be used for medical related services. And frequently it funds school nurse, so you might have an extra school nurse as a result of that. Northborough between K-8 and Algonquin, about $40,000. Marlborough's $228,000. Worcester, that's real money. It's $2.2 million that they get from school Medicaid every year. So that going away automatically means a loss of staff, loss of medical services for kids that really need it. And again, there's no way to fund that without significantly increasing everybody's taxes because the money isn't coming back here. I don't know the details on how school-based Medicaid is affected by I'll use Big Beautiful Bill because that's the title of the thing. But the House version of the proposal cuts $600 billion for Medicaid. I haven't read the Senate bill to see this number yet, so I'm not sure. And I know there are a lot of differences between the House and the Senate version on a number of things. I'll get to one of them in a couple of minutes. But this is, pretty worrisome that if this is not Department of Education, this is Medicaid, so it might be perfectly fine, it might change. But, you can see the writing on the wall that the national federal government wants to get out of the business of education. So this will probably be one of the things people want to get rid of if they have their way. Excuse me. So I mentioned this earlier, can't we just pay for this stuff locally? The tax savings of all of these cuts, they're just going to the owners. I should have probably created a slide with the details, but it's too depressing. I doubt anyone in this room is going to get any considerable tax decrease as a result of all of these savings that DOGE and all the other groups are doing at the national level. It's going to be pretty hard to sort of make ourselves whole in terms of the services in education or elsewhere in government with the cuts coming down, because your state taxes would go up, federal taxes would stay the same, state taxes would have to go up, and your local taxes would have to go up. Local taxes in Massachusetts are constrained by what's called Proposition 2.5, which roughly speaking says your property taxes can't go up more than 2.5% a year. It's not really what it means, but that's in theory what it is. And almost every town, including Northborough, is pretty much at the limit of Prop 2.5. So if we want to say, hey, let's just add $100,000 to compensate for the Title I services. That even if we said we wanted to do that, adding $100,000, if that hits our limit of Prop 2.5, that means you've got to do something called an operating override, which is a very high bar to get because you need voter approval for that. It's not just town meeting approval or city council approval if it's a city. It's voter approval, and that's people aren't excited to pass Prop 2.5 operating overrides. So really what it means is if you want to put $100,000 more into your schools, you got to find $100,000 to cut elsewhere. So you've got to lay off a police officer or or a firefighter or a librarian to be able to do that. Because municipalities are all staff. It's a people business. Any questions? All right. Our next department, if you will, is talking about municipal government. Inflation Reduction Act. This print isn't too small, but so Inflation Reduction Act was passed in 2022. Party line vote. It was part of the budget reconciliation process. So budget reconciliation is something that in the Senate they can pass one bill a year that adjusts. It's primarily to adjust budgets. Line item doesn't change. Not supposed to change the rules, and the Senate can approve it with a 50% plus one vote, a simple majority vote, instead of the 60% that they normally need for closure. And budget reconciliation, you hear about the big beautiful bill going, that's a budget reconciliation bill. That's why that is so special to the Republicans right now, because they have a majority in the House and Senate. They don't have 60%. That they can do anything legally allowed within reconciliation. So the Inflation Reduction Act was a really important bill that we got through the reconciliation process, and did a lot of good things. It helped lower prescription drug pricing. It increased taxes, not really increased taxes, but it set a minimum threshold for large businesses whose revenue were over $1 billion. It hired 87,000 new employees for the IRS, primarily to go after high-income earners who weren't paying their fair share. Those people, they have bright accountants and bright lawyers, so you need more effort to go after them if they're not paying their share. Continued expansion of the Affordable Care Act, approved when Obama was president, and it provided $783 billion to spend on climate change and energy security. And that's what I want to get into now. So the green energy rebates that are part of the IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, is something that there's a new thing for government that's really exciting. So the stuff that everybody knows about there, tax credits that you get, they're called rebates, but they're really tax credits that you get if you buy an electric vehicle or a hybrid car or a plug-in hybrid. You can usually then claim, it might be $2,000 or $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 on a tax credit on your taxes, and that's pretty good. That's an incentive to get a car that is energy efficient, that has a lower carbon footprint. It's good for the environment, but it's good for people. It's good for everybody. But because they're a little bit more expensive, this incentive helps ramp up that system, and as those electric cars become easier to build and less expensive to build, the incentives hopefully will no longer be needed in the future. But this helps ramp things up, and the government has always used these incentives to ramp up good things until they become normal. Included in the IRA were a lot of rebates or tax credits for ground source heat pumps. Geothermal systems is what people call them. I'll get into what they are in a second. So governments are tax exempt, so I would call these tax credits, and they are tax credits. As you fill out your 1040, you say, okay, this is how much I owe the federal government, and if you're eligible for a $2,000 tax credit for buying a plug-in hybrid, well, you just deduct $2,000 at the bottom of your 1040, and that's it. A municipal government doesn't file a tax form. So even though municipal governments would really benefit from the long-term tax savings of something like a geothermal system for municipal buildings, there's no way to do it because they don't file taxes, so how do you get a tax credit when you don't file taxes? So one of the key things that the Inflation Reduction Act did is it created that mechanism. It created what's called a direct pay system within the IRS, where a municipality like the town of Northborough could file a special tax form and get a quote-unquote tax credit, which is just a check. And that check can be used to offset the cost of a qualifying purchase. And that can be anything from an electric car used for the fleet, or it can be a geothermal energy system. So I'm going to get into a little bit more for a particular reason. Some people in this room know why about geothermal systems. They're really energy efficient. They transfer heat to or from the ground. So through a number of wells drilled around the building, water or an antifreeze type of solution is pumped in and out, and that's then used to either cool the air in the building or heat the air in the building. And it's incredibly energy efficient. It uses electricity. Oftentimes they are paired with solar panels on a roof to generate that electricity, and you can have a really good system. You have to drill a lot of wells to do it. It's expensive. It can add sometimes a couple $1 million to the cost of the building to put in a thermal system, but you do get that money back. The problem is it's really hard for a municipality to say, you know, go to town meeting and say, yeah, let's spend a couple $1 million extra, don't worry, you'll get it back later, but it works. You know, I've stood up at town meeting and tried to get things passed. People want the lowest cost right now. So these rebates or tax credits were suddenly available to municipalities, and for the Northborough Fire Station that is in the process of being constructed now, we were able to get a really good geothermal system approved. And for those who are residents of Northborough, you know, I'm the one who spoke up about that and presented this item at town meeting. I feel very personally connected with this particular project and this feature of this project. So as we were looking at the design of the fire station, the HVAC system, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, the cheapest one was $2.6 million, but if we were to go geothermal, it was going to be a little over $4 million, $4.2 million. That's just the difference in cost that it would be to drill the wells and have somewhat different mechanical systems in place. But most of it, honestly, is the cost of the well. I forget how many wells, it's like 2 dozen wells we need to drill to make this work. So $1.6 million is hard to swallow. Again, even if you can say, don't worry, you'll save it in the long run, which you would, that it's, you know, you're going to save $1.8 million over the long term, it's still hard to convince town to go ahead and do that for one. So, all right, what about these rebates? So Massachusetts has had some rebates on the books for a few years that municipalities can take advantage of. So for a geothermal system of the size and capacity that the fire station needed, we would get about $900,000 back. And that's safe, that's all state money. So Mass Save is the program that on your electric bill, there's a line up, down to the bottom that's like energy conservation or something like that. That actually, you pay a couple dollars into that goes into the Mass Save program, and this is one of the uses of that program. You also have the ability to call somebody up and say, hey, do an energy audit of our house, and we won't charge you for it because it's paid out of that system. Discounted light bulbs, rebates on heating system for your house, it's all the same program. So it's a really good system that Massachusetts runs. But the Inflation Reduction Act added $1 million to the pot for that. So it works out to be 25.5% of system cost if it's funded by a tax-exempt bond. So this type of rebate has actually been around for a few years, but you said municipalities couldn't do it. So if you were borrowing money or buying money as a commercial entity, you'd get a 30% rebate. So they worked it out that there's a 15% reduction to the 30%. That's how it ends up being 25.5% for municipalities. But because, again, we're not paying taxes on that, and municipal bonds are really, really cheap, really low interest rate, 25 is great. So with that extra $1 million, the cost of the geothermal system ended up being less expensive initially than the cheapest HVAC system that we could put in to the building. And that's great. It's an easy sell. I put an asterisk next to that because there are some weird rules in there that, depending on how you squint, how you look at it, sometimes the rebate can't make it less expensive than the cheapest system. So we're letting lawyers and accountants figure out the best way of going in. And the system saves money every year. So the energy bills that the town of Northborough will pay for this building will be lower every single year forever because of this. And believe it or not, to be eligible for this, but it's a great advantage, the fire station will have no fossil fuel use at all. Technically, there's a generator behind the building because that's the town's emergency operations center. That makes sense to have a diesel generator buried out back. I think it's diesel, not gas. But the building itself, there's no fossil fuel whatsoever in there, and that's great. So the project was approved this past fall. and it'll be done at the end of 2026. I apologize, I can talk for hours and hours and hours about the fire station project. It's a lot of fun. So, everyone was asking me, hey, when Trump got elected, what the heck is going on? He wants to get rid of all of these energy rebates. So here are a couple of headlines. Trump aims at Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, targeting EV clean energy manufacturing, and Trump is freezing money for clean energy. Red states have the most to lose, and this is where it's going to get interesting. So, since this started to become, these headlines started, everyone's asking me, hey, what's going on? You promised us, are you going to pay the difference? So I've been paying a lot of attention and reading the actual reconciliation bills, looking to see exactly how things are going on. And again, I apologize if this print is a little small, because this is a fast-moving target. So, what happens if the rebate goes away? We've already committed to this project. The town has signed the contract. We can't change the HVAC system at this point. We've already started to drill the wells. So that's $1 million that ends up on the back of the Northborough taxpayers if this went away. I don't think it is. I think we're okay, but this is one of the things we've got to follow. So Trump's proposal, he wanted to just get rid of it like day one. He was pretty clear about that. The House version bounced around several different versions. The version of the House bill that lasted the longest phased things out beginning at the end of 2028. So if a project was complete by the end of calendar year 2028, you get full rebate, and then it reduces by 30% per year, something like that, and then after at the end of calendar 2031, you get nothing of a rebate, and it goes away. There were different years in different versions of the bill, but that was the most commonly seen. The project, as I mentioned, is going to be done at the end of 2026. No problem. Northborough is in great shape for the fire station. Maybe not for future projects, but at least for the fire station, we'd be okay. There was one of those middle of the night changes in votes to get enough Republicans on board with this big, beautiful bill. And then it changed, really at the last second, to language that said that the project must begin no later than 60 days after the bill becomes law. So that bill is not law yet. This is just the House-approved version. Northborough would still be okay. The downside is this limits a lot of other towns from taking advantage of this. And it's a great system, and more towns, including Northborough for future projects, should do this. You know, if Worcester's building a new school or a fire station or any kind of a building, they should be able to, if they want, if the site works, put the geothermal in, put solar panels on the roof, and get some money back from the federal government. House doesn't seem to want that. So next up was keeping an eye on the Senate bill. Senate bill is a little bit better. As I mentioned, a lot of red states have been taking really good advantage of this, both solar and geothermal. They're good plans, and it's good money for them, so they do it. Particularly states in the South with solar panels, boy, that's a great place to be. So the Senate version is or was, remember I said something changed this morning. So the Senate version yesterday said that the project needed to be complete by 2034, which was even better for the whole country than the earlier House bill. That just changed with changes they made overnight, changed from 2034 to 2028. So I don't like it, but it's at least still better than the House bill. What will happen, assuming the Senate passes this version, then the House has their version, they're going to fight it again. Who the heck knows? We're keeping an eye on it. But that's where things are right now. So Northborough has a school early in feasibility. We're going to be renovating or probably replacing the current Peasley Elementary School. That's the next big project on the books for the town. I would love to see them put geothermal and solar on that building. This is too early in feasibility. They're not even going to start this for a couple more years. So depending upon what version of what bill ends up becoming law and what may or may not be able to take advantage of, and the same is true with every other town. So I don't know what the town's going to do with that. We'll always see what happens at the end of this bill, if and when they figure out how this sorts out. I want to call credit to the town over the border from us, Westboro. They completed a couple of years ago the Annie Thales Elementary School. Look at the roof of this building. This is solid solar panels. It's solar panels. Geothermal is the first net positive energy school in Massachusetts. They've been open, I think, 3 school years now. They've yet to receive an electric bill. There's no fossil fuels in it. It's awesome. And it's a pretty neat building, too. Bigger than what we built here for the Peasley School. But boy, did they do a good job with this. So this is really the future of what schools should be. But towns need some help to make it happen. We get to federal office closures next. People excited? Jim, question?
Yeah.
I guess feel free to come up, or I can repeat your
So, thanks, Mitch. Is this on?
Okay.
Is it right on the side, Jim?
Yep.
Sorry.
Oh, there we go. You know how to use a microphone. Good.
Yeah,
You're actually really good.
So I'm glad you put the risk bit on this.
Yeah.
Is there any, so I think part of the major criticism, my major criticism of the Trump administration and everything that's going on is the pure chaos of it.
Yeah.
Would there be any legal recourse if they post, sorry, we've already granted this funding, but we're just going to take it away without the 2028 or 2034 or whatever it is, roll off, and then you're just stuck with the bill?
Just about everything you ever see in in any form of government is always a line at the bottom, subject to appropriation. And a good example of that is when a town in Massachusetts builds a school, they get significant funding from the Mass School Building Authority, which is an agency of the state government under the treasurer. Sometimes pays 50 or 60% of schools, sometimes it's as low as 20%, depends on the district. There is language in that contract that the town signs with the state that says subject to appropriation. The legislature says, hey, we've got a more important use for this money. And you might be getting this money over the next 5 or 10 years. We might in theory take it away. They never do. So legal recourse, probably not. I would love that to be the case, but we're going to talk about grants in a little bit.
Got it. Yeah, so I think you already answered it a little bit. So if you have, how much is the firehouse total?
40 million.
40 million, and you've got a grant of, let's say, several million from the state or the
For a fire station, yeah, you get the 2 million for the geothermal, and that's about all we're getting.
Yeah, well, I'd say that's a school, right?
Yeah, school you get it, right. Yeah.
So that grant would be payable over a certain amount of years? Or it would be, hey, we're giving you $2 million for this year, and regardless of, how does that work?
For schools or for the fire stations?
Well, let's say schools, because you're planning school now?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's say school, so the state's appropriation for that school, or the federal government's appropriation for that school, would that be like, hey, we're giving you this grant this year, or is it paid typically over the years?
It's paid kind of as you go. So the state, so for school money, it's all state. There's no federal money that helps school construction. Other than geothermal rebates or solar rebates or anything like that. So state MSBA is a reimbursement grant. So you sign the contract with the contractor. They do a month's worth of work. Let's say that month's worth of work cost $1 million. You write a check for the $1 million. You send that to the state. Within a month or two, The state will then send back the $500,000 if they're covering 50% of the project. So you roll that into your cash flow. And so over time, you're always paying a little bit more than your share, but then you're getting it back pretty quickly from the state. And it works out pretty well. It would be great if you could just send the state the bill from the contractor, but they want you to own the project. So it makes sense the way that it is. It used to be different. It used to be that you had to borrow the entire cost of the project. So if a school was $30 million and the state was paying half, you still had to borrow, the town needed to borrow $30 million. And then over the 20 years of that bond, you would get a check every year from the state. And I give credit to Governor Mitt Romney for completely changing that whole system much for the better. That the new MSBA funding formula, everything else, it's less money for the towns, which is too bad, but the funding process makes a lot more sense. That there's no reason that the state has to hold on to a 20-year bond for a school when it has the money to pay the cash. And then the town is, has to hold less debt. But there was always a risk that during that 20-year period, subject to appropriation, the state may say, you know what, I can't afford MSBA this year. Sorry, town of Northborough, we need to pay your bond on, say, the Lincoln Elementary School, the school we did about 10 years ago.
And so that's what you're facing with the feds. What you're facing is the feds have a series of grants that they're paying out over every year that you're relying on, and they could just go away.
At the federal, in theory, it's one of those things, in theory, it could not happen, but you have a sense of trust in the government, and the state government and the federal government. They're saying they're going to make good on this. It's not like they're going to go out of business. Not like the state's going to run out of money. It's not like the federal government's going to run out of money. They're just going to say, yeah, screw you. I'm just going to have to do it anymore. So, yeah, if you put in for this and the federal government said, you know what, we're no longer going to fund this tax credit for your geothermal purifier station, screw you, then screw you.
Wow. Well, thanks, Mitch.
It's all happy news here. So, speaking of screw you, federal office closures. So, in February, the DOJ department, which isn't really a department, but that's what it is, sent out notices to office buildings all over the country saying, we're going to close these offices. We're going to cancel all these leases. A couple of headlines: massive lease termination under Trump / government office space saves $144 billion. Trump administration cancels leases. This is local. 37% of central Massachusetts space used by federal agencies. So there are a lot of federal agencies that have offices all over every state, including Massachusetts, and 37% of central Mass offices owned by the federal, or used by the federal government. They just decided to cancel the leases. So nationwide was, in theory, $144 million of savings, 2.3 million square feet of total space across the country. So the ones that were impacted locally, Northborough, I've spoken a little bit about this before, has, and what it still has, the United States Geological Survey, of 21,000 square feet. That's the largest of the offices that would be closed under the Trump administration by what they announced in February. Boylston has the FDA, Southborough has an IRS office, Uxbridge and Sutton in the Blackstone Valley area each have a Department of Agriculture office, small ones. Worcester has an IRS office, and Worcester also has a Department of Justice office. So it's about 60,000 square feet in central Massachusetts. This is more fluid than fluid. There's the theory that people have heard about called taco. Trump always chickens out. I don't know whether this really qualifies for the taco thing. A lot of these kind of are disappearing as far as the lease cancellations go. We'll get into that in a second. It's pretty weird. I want to talk about what the USGS does in Northborough. Honestly, until this happened, I didn't even know that office existed. Turns out, I learned about it about a week before because one of the employees of the USGS gave a really good talk at our historical society in one of the programs that they did. And that's when I found out we had a USGS office in Northborough and what they did. And then a week later, I found it was closing. So what they call the office is the New England Water Science Center. And, you know, in theory, they provide, I'll just read from it, from their website, we provide timely and reliable information to federal, state, tribal, and local stakeholders on water resources throughout New England. Our data help safeguard human and wildlife health, public safety, and environmental sustainability. They analyze and communicate information on the quality and movement of surface water and groundwater throughout all the states in New England. That's really important stuff. So they analyze how water flows, both above the ground and below the ground. And that's helpful for conservation offices in town and city halls when they review developments and they say, hey, you know, we want to make sure silt doesn't end up in this area or chemical runoff doesn't end up in this area, because they can watch through the USGS websites, and anyone can go to stream stats, it's pretty cool, can then see, okay, how would this then flow? And, oh, you know, even though you're a mile away, I can see how this chemical spill, if it were to occur, could end up in a municipal water supply. And that's a lot of work. It's really cool that they do that. And it's helpful for developers in planning for things. And it's helpful if there is a chemical spill. If a truck dumps a load of oil off the side of the road, the fire department or the water department in that town can pull up stream stats, put in that area and say, okay, this is going to go here, this is going to go here, and then they know where to deploy all the stuff to pick up the oil if they want to, you know, keep an eye for it or just test for it downstream. Because sometimes it's really, really not obvious, because you can see a stream going this way, but actually the groundwater goes the other way, or it zigzags around. So they're real professionals. They've got about 80 scientists and other professionals working there. It's kind of my guess. I wasn't able to get a real number. It's a 32,000 square foot office building. They use about 2/3 of it. And it's right on the corner of Barefoot Road and Solomon Pond Mall Road. So you've probably passed by it 100 times if you go up to the mall. So the building is owned by a company called Caruth Capital. They own buildings. It's kind of, you know, that's their industry. So taxes work in weird ways for commercial buildings that are leased for profit. For your house, you pay simply a percentage of the property value. They look and see, okay, you've got a house, it's 2,000 square feet. They look around you. Houses for 2,000 square feet are going for $400,000 right now. I'm just making up that number right over there. And then they go ahead and they assign a value to your house, and then you pay a percentage of that value. And it's pretty straightforward how that gets figured out. If you're a commercial office building and you occupy that space, it's done the exact same way. But there are a lot of commercial office buildings that operate based on a rental model. Really, you know, an investor owns the building and then leases it out to somebody else. So how do you figure out what the appropriate value is of that building? Because those buildings don't turn over. It's harder to look at similar properties. So every year, if you own a commercial office building that you rent out, you submit your leases, or at least the financial information about your leases to the town. Not public records, nobody can look at them, but they are used by the town or city assessors to figure out what the appropriate value is. And that's important because if there are a large number of buildings in the town that suddenly become unused, the assessed value starts to go down, and the amount of money that the commercial taxpayers are paying as a percentage of the funding, the property tax funding that goes in to fund town services like schools and fire and police and library and everything else, suddenly gets shifted a little bit more towards the residences because the commercial services are becoming a little bit more empty. This is one of the things that concerns me about suddenly in central Massachusetts, 60,000 square feet of space suddenly becoming vacant, is that could start to impact the taxpayers. Even though it's not directly their money, indirectly it is. Indirectly, they're going to get the bill for what the federal government did. So that's the tax connection to that. So what they did, you can even say it, USGS, they obviously said that they were going to close that office. The lease was good for another 4 or 5 years. They said, no, we're going to end it on August 31st. And what about the people in that building? What about the people who work for the USGS in Northborough? So it used to be something called remote work, and remote work became a big thing for the federal government and everybody else during the pandemic. It worked really well. I've been in it for a long time, long time. And for a lot of federal government workers, it was a pretty good setup. Scientists, when you work with lab equipment, you've got to go in. But Trump said no more remote work. Federal government, you got to be in an office. Well, if they say you got to be in an office, and we're taking away your office, it's kind of a hint as to what's going to happen with your job. So the folks at the USGS office were told, hey, your lease is up at the end of August. We'll tell you about the rest later. Turns out the rest later, it's not bad. It turned out they canceled the lease. They canceled the cancellation, which is just a weird thing that turns out they did with a lot of the offices. So they made headlines saying, we're going to cancel all these leases we're saving. I forget how many hundreds of millions of dollars that they were in theory saving. Turns out a whole bunch of those lease cancellations were rescinded. So to give Doge minor credit, they're a bunch of computer nerds. They're obviously not caring about the things that they're doing from a human perspective, but they're keeping track of the data somewhat well, and they've got this doge.gov website where they list all this stuff, and I think they consider it a badge of honor to say, look how much money we're saving with all these things we canceled. Hooray, good for us. Really, it's kind of a blame list. You know, it's almost evidence of the crime that they're putting out there. So I took a look at the Doge website, and so of those 7 properties in central Massachusetts, there are only 4 still listed. And at least one of them, the Northborough one, I know isn't being canceled. That's still there. It's still on the list. It gets into a little bit of the chaos that was mentioned earlier, that it's hard to really keep track of what's going on because one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing. But right now, officially on the list, it says Northborough has given up, in theory, saving $358,000. The federal government is saving by taking the USGS office out of Northborough. Everything I understand is that office is now good. Nothing's happening there. I don't know about the FDA office in Boylston or about the FDA, or the Animal and Plant Health, and there's something else on the other page in Sutton and Uxbridge. So who really knows? They might be saving nothing out of us. I don't know. So the press has picked it up on Doge and the inaccurate information claim that there is listed all sorts of things. I think they even listed some things as canceled that they never canceled. And obviously they have rescinded some of the cancellations that are still on the list. Is that data good? Who the heck knows? I don't know if anybody knows. But chaos is kind of what they're good at. So as I mentioned, I've been told by a few people that I trust that the Northborough office is in good shape for the USGS. And not trustworthy and chaotic, maybe that's the point. All right, next up is libraries. Any questions over here?
I'm really blown away by I'm really blown away by the level of detail you've got here. It's pretty in-depth.
I hope I'm not putting too many people to sleep.
Well, I don't know, but you've had my attention. But one of the things that I look at here, one of the things I'd like to get a better handle on is thinking in terms of, we're dealing with cuts in funding coming in, which means that there are things that either we won't be able to do, or we'll have to find money elsewhere. And you look in my pocket for that, or all of our pockets for that money. And so that's an impact upon us. And either we won't get services, or we won't get facilities, or whatever, or we'll have to pony up for that. Also, in terms of the chaos, it makes it almost impossible on a municipality timescale, like planning things years ahead. You can't do that. There's an opportunity cost, lost opportunities that we have to deal with. And that has a real impact on our ability to make infrastructure changes, the fiscal infrastructure, and the plan for things that we need. You know, and I'm sort of thinking in those terms, while, you know, I learned a lot about the U.S. Geological Service there, but the fact that you pointed out that they canceled it and then rescinded it and stuff, I mean, it makes it really hard for government to work at all, let alone efficiently.
Yeah.
So, in thinking in those terms, sort of like the, you know, the action, the impact, what is this going to mean for the individuals in towns, and also the ability for government to run, and run well at a local level, which is really, you know, let's hammer a nail into our head, right? You know, it seems like. So anyway, just a comment on that, and sort of like trying to look at that aspect of it.
Yeah, you think, a lot of people think about government in chaos, but yeah.
So when are you going to give us good news?
Maybe the next presentation. I mean, there are bits of good news hidden, like the chaos, sometimes things work out okay. The USGS office in Northborough is saved. Some of the grants that were taken away might be okay. There are lawsuits that some of these things get clawed back. It's not really, honestly, there's not a lot of good news here, sorry.
So what can we do as next positive steps? You know, like the presentation, you present the problem, and then you come back, here's what you can do next.
Sure. So I'll repeat roughly in the front row. Somebody asked, well, what can we do next? What are some positive things that we can get out of this? What I'm trying to do here is educate, to let people know, to connect the terrifying headlines that you see on TV and the newspaper with the local reality. Because we don't have much local news anymore. We've got a great weekly in Northborough. Like a couple of reporters cover several different towns, and they can't cover a lot of this because they don't have the time. The Worcester Telegram isn't going to cover much of this. Certainly the Boston Globe isn't going to cover much of this. So a lot of this the public is not aware of. So knowledge is the first step, and then some of it might be, you know, in this case. You know, obviously, you know, complain to your legislatures, that's the usual thing. We happen to have really good state and national legislators here in Northborough and most of this area. But even talking to them and saying, you know, this sucks. Keep pushing back against this, and showing that you're educated to some of the local impacts can be helpful. And, you know, maybe there are earmarks that they can put into offset. Like I'm going to talk about libraries and cuts to services in libraries in a second. And, well, if those cuts remain permanent, maybe there are some things that the state government can do if you start to ask your state rep or state senator, go ahead and, hey, can you put something in the budget? That's a little bit of something you can do.
I just wanted to try to answer that. I think we're seeing a lot of chaos.
That's the bottom switch.
We're seeing a lot.
It stays on.
Hello?
Yeah, just the one at the bottom.
Hi. We're seeing a lot of chaos, and it's meant to keep us off kilter. There's so much coming at us. I would strongly suggest that people mobilize, join our group or another indivisible group, write letters, sign letters, rally, do anything possible to save democracy. We won the civil rights, right? Civil rights for people because they were out in the streets. The Vietnam War stopped because we were out in the streets. Females got the right to vote because we were out in the streets. And I think this is what we're up against. This is what we have to do. This is the reality. Oh, Jim.
So, here's what kills me about all this. If you look at states' contribution to the federal budget versus what they take out, Massachusetts is number 1 in contribution per capita to the federal budget because we have a very successful state. We have a lot of high-income earners, we have a lot of mid-income earners, we have relatively few low-income earners, we have low crime rates. We are number 50 in what we take from the federal government. We're number 1 in what we give to the federal government. We're number 50 in what we take from the federal government. We are paying the federal government to exist. And that money comes back to the states. So when when each of us pays our taxes, that money goes to the feds and some of it comes back to us. But a lot more of it goes back to Mississippi. It contributes almost nothing to the federal budget, but takes a tremendous amount. Okay? So part of the problem that in theory, right, the theory that Doge gives us, and Mitch, you've set this up really well, is hey, we're saving all this money, so we're saving you, the taxpayer, money. But we're not, because of 2 things. 1, taxes aren't going down. Your taxes aren't going down because you saved, you shut down this building that costs $1 million a year. The taxpayers aren't getting that back at all. In fact, what we see in the first Trump administration is the federal deficit explodes, which means that we pay interest on that. The deficit explodes, that means we're borrowing money, we pay interest on that. Massachusetts is paying interest on that, Missouri's not paying. We're paying the interest. So we're not getting back. But the other piece to it is, they're billing all these tax cuts, right? They're saying, hey, we're gonna shut down all these buildings, we're gonna remove all this funding. But don't worry, you're going to get it back in tax cuts. But then, what did Mitch just tell us? They're undoging some of this stuff. Which means that the billionaires are going to get the tax cuts. But we're actually not shutting down some of these programs, because what happens is, if you are, let's say, Mitch is an elected official in West Virginia, then, let's say Mitch is an elected official in West Virginia, and I like some of these things, but then you hear about the cuts, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, that's going to really hurt my state. So Mitch complains to his Republican lawmakers, and his Republican lawmakers say, don't worry, we'll get that money back from you. We'll find some of this huge, massive bill, we'll find a little way to get that money back to you. So now the cuts aren't really real. So we're increasing the deficit, which the people of Massachusetts are going to be paying for, but we're not actually getting the cuts, and you can't plan a budget. So my question, and it is a hypothetical question that I kind of want everybody to think about, is why should Massachusetts continue to pay for this nonsense at all? If Massachusetts had all of the tax money that we send the feds, guess what? We'd have way more money in our pockets, even if they cut 100% of the bills. So they're damaging our towns, and we're not going to get anything from it.
I was hoping you'd have good news there, Jim.
No.
So when I look in my crystal ball, it looks like we are headed for a huge tax revolution. Is that not so?
Well, the richest among us will pay less taxes, and the middle class and the poor people will pay more taxes.
I mean, because you can only push a
Wait a
person
minute,
so
folks,
far.
I can't hear.
Yeah.
Please use the microphone.
You can, I believe you can only push a person so far. And it just looks like a setup of a huge tax revolution by the people. Because there's more of us than there are of these I call them Ola dogs.
To sort of simplify what Jim was saying for a moment, what seems to be happening is it seems to be targeting blue states, which tend to be very successful states, so-called giver states as opposed to taker states. And in fact, if you saw a stack of who was the biggest giver state to the most taker state, it would be very blue and then very red. And that's to be understood, very carefully understood. But what's happening is by cutting off the funding to Massachusetts and other blue states like that, what they're doing is they're forcing for us to maintain services to start ponying up in our state taxes. So, you know, some of us may get a small federal tax decrease, but we're going to get a large state tax increase, whether property taxes, income taxes, or whatever, to offset that money that's not coming from the Fed. And we're still going to be sending all the money we were sending before to the Fed, making us an even bigger donor state supporting whatever tax cuts or limiting things, limiting funding or whatever, paying for whatever boondoggles the current regime would like us to have. So it's really as much punishment to liberal states as it is any sort of pretense of fiscal responsibility.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I guess my sort of summary is, this is a question for Maura Healey, who has shown zero leadership. Zero leadership. She has a fantastic Instagram account. That is not leadership. And when we look at some of these other governors, we're starting a little bit of leadership. They're at the beginning of this process too. Right? They're keeping their powder dry. But you see a significant amount of action from some of these other governors and a threat of even more action. And Governor Healey says, yeah, it's terrible. Yeah, it's terrible. What can we do? I don't accept that. So that's the next step. This question is for Maura Healey. Not Mitch, he's doing as good as he can.
And we'll talk about libraries, which is one of my favorite topics. Libraries are awesome. I love libraries. I'll bet everybody in here goes to your local library. Free and equal access to books, videos, research and historic documents, job training services, in-person talks, discussion groups, place to go for Girl Scout meetings, everything else. Libraries are just awesome. There should be twice as many libraries as there are. They should be much better funded than what they are. But what we have is already awesome. The libraries are under attack. Some see libraries as socialism. Particularly folks that think everything they don't like is socialism. Some see libraries as educating public in maybe the wrong ways, whether it be, DEI or, books that actually educate or anything else. That's, we're headed way the wrong direction with that. So there's a federal department, kind of used to be a federal department called the Institute of Library and Museum Services. A number of people saw this in the headlines back a couple of months ago. The IMLS was essentially completely defunded and fired. The website's still there. It says that the IMLS is an independent federal agency that supports libraries, archives, and museums in all 50 states and U.S. territories. Their budget is 0.03% of the federal budget. It's pretty much nothing. And there are 1.2 billion in-person patron visits of libraries in the United States every year. Obviously, that counts multiple people going in lots of times. And even that doesn't even count the remote visits. This is really a big deal in libraries. Most library funding is state and local. So libraries themselves are not at tremendous risk of closing. That's maybe some good news. But a lot of the services that libraries provide are really at risk. This is a statement from the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners. It's sort of the overseer, if you will, of Massachusetts libraries, talking about some of the things that are at risk. There are a number of, because the federal government just sort of said, we're not writing any more checks on this stuff. So there were a few things that were ceased in Massachusetts immediately. There's a big list of items that didn't even fit on this sheet of things that are closing on July 1st, which is, I think, is Tuesday. So the Boston Globe article archive is gone from the statewide database list. Some individual libraries are going to maintain it. I'll get to that in a second. Encyclopedia Britannica, Gale Legal Forms. There's a whole bunch of Gale associated databases. I only put one on here. There are, actually I put two on here. Test prep services, job training services, science databases, things like that. Those are going away because those were funded directly by the IMLS to Massachusetts. Funding's gone. There wasn't time for the state to come up with additional funding, so poof. There are services at risk that are not going away right now, but could if funding isn't found. So Commonwealth Catalog is a collection of all library catalogs across the state, across the Commonwealth. As if you have a library card in, say, Northborough, and there's a book that you want to borrow from, say, way out in North Adams, completely different library network, but you can do it. You can do it through your library. You can use the Commonwealth Catalog to say, I want to get this, and it'll come to your library, and then you can pick it up. And that whole system is significantly funded by money that used to come from the IMLS. They're figuring out how they're going to fund it now, but it's so critical. They'll keep it going for at least a little bit longer, but I'm not sure where that's going to go. The regional library networks. Northborough is part of CWMR, Central and Western Massachusetts, so that's from, I think it's Westborough through somewhere in the Springfield area, is CWMR's, and the ability to borrow books and materials from any of the libraries, and then very, very easily, just through the regular library website, that is to agree to be funded by the federal MLS program. CWMR's has some money in the bank. They're in the position where they'll be able to withstand this turbulence. So I've been told, don't worry, CWMR's isn't shutting down right now, but they need to find separate funding. And that's going to end up coming from local libraries in the state, because if the federal government doesn't start taking in money, they'll have to figure out how to do that. And the same is true with the other regional library networks in Massachusetts, which really are awesome. Summer reading programs, to a great extent, are funded by this. And a lot of the ebooks and audiobook systems are funded this way. And ebooks, a lot of people think, hey, they're cheaper because you don't have to print the book. It must be cheaper for a library to buy an electronic book. It's just bits and bytes. It turns out it's a lot more expensive. It's up to 5 times more expensive for a library to get and provide electronic books than it is print books, because a book you can buy anywhere and you put it on the shelf and it's available forever. An electronic book, they license to the library, and the publishers have realized they can make a lot more money that way, so they'll sell or license that title to a library for sometimes 2 or 3 times the cost of a book, or they'll say, yeah, it's the same cost as a book, you can lend it out to 5 people, and then that license expires. Or you can lend this out for 90 days, and then the license expires. After that, you buy it again, and you buy it again, and you buy it again. There are bills in the State House to try to deal with that in some way. How that'll sort out, I'm not sure. But anyway, so that requires a lot of funding, and some of the funding that comes from the IMLS helps fund Libby and Hoopla and the other services that libraries all across the country use to provide the electronic services. Well, it comes back to, okay, well, how can we keep those services? Well, obviously you can pay for them some other way. So if something is going away from the state, there are some libraries, including ours in Northborough, that is looking at some of the neighboring towns and saying, hey, can we work on this together? Can we maybe, get some of these electronic services like the Encyclopedia Britannica or the Globe Archive or something like that back? So, in theory, Northborough can partner with Westborough and Southborough and get a license from those to get it. That ends up being a lot more expensive per patron. Because instead of the whole Commonwealth of Massachusetts negotiating a really good price with, say, Boston Globe or Encyclopedia Britannica, it's a couple little towns here and a couple little towns there and a couple little towns there, and that ends up costing more money to do that, and then you end up with inconsistencies from town to town in terms of what you have access to, and that's identical to what libraries should offer. It creates the inequities that you don't want to see in a library system, but that's kind of the option that's there, and it kind of stinks. My last section is on federal grants. Some equally good news to everything that has been shared thus far. Most people saw a lot of these headlines that federal grants, thousands and some thousands of them went up in smoke. Rural schools feel the pinch. Historically Black universities, realist Trump cuts, Black focused grants, cuts to the NIH. We heard about that at another game event back a couple of months ago. There's some pushback on that and some successful pushback. Here's one: federal judge strikes down Trump cuts to National Institutes of Health grants, linked to diversity and gender. That seems to be certainly a big target, but honestly, in looking at the database of the grants cuts, I think it's just so widespread and random, or just 100% of everything gets cut. But these are temporary restorations. These are, a big thing about these grants is these are grants that are already awarded. These aren't grants that you put in an application for, you find out whether you get them or not, and it turns out nobody gets them. But you were planning you might not get it. And that's not good, but it's not awful. These are grants that you already have a letter, and in many cases you've already started to get some money on. And the federal government's saying, that grant for $250,000 we were going to give you? Yeah, we sent you $15,000 last month. That's it. It's over. I know you started the program. I know you hired the person. I know you signed the contract. That's on you. Too bad. That's what a lot of these grants do. So, back to DOJ and their website, they let you download all of the grants that they've cut. And so I did. It's 15,000 and change grants. It's in JSON format, which is a computer-y format. If anyone wants it as an Excel file, let me know. I'll send it to you. It's about 44 billion in cuts. These are all from grants that have already been awarded, and I said in many cases already partially provided. That makes it really, really hard for those government agencies and nonprofits or whoever else is getting that money to be able to plan for that, because you hired the person, you started to do the work, and suddenly the money's gone. A couple of local examples. If you go out to Church Street right over there and drive 5 miles that way, you'll hit the New England Botanical Garden, used to be called Tower Hill Botanical Garden. Great, great local resource. If you don't go there, go there. There's a great social exhibit out right now in the fall of just some great artwork. They have different stuff every year, but it's a botanical garden. I won't pretend to know much about plants and flowers and stuff that they grow there, but it's pretty. It's a nice place to walk around. So they were cut by a grant of $250,000 that again they had already started to work on, and it was going to expand essential curatorial services. They were hiring a full-time person to start the process and everything else. You can go to the New England Botanical Garden website and learn all about this, because they put a good press release out there on what this means to them. Yeah.
That grant has been reinstated.
Oh, has it been?
It's challenged, yeah.
Okay, that I did not see. Okay, so I'll repeat that. One in the front row said the grant has been reinstated.
Correct.
So that's awesome. So I will talk about this, and this is the chaos. This is still on the DOJ website as being canceled. In theory, that's the canonical place to look for the savings. So that's great news. Thank you. That makes me happy. So about this grant that is now okay. It was a $504,000 project cost. I don't know where the rest of the money came from. It was $250,000 coming from IMLS. We just talked about it a minute ago. They had already received $35,000 of that federal money, and then they said, yeah, you started, too bad. Sounds like, was it in regards to a lawsuit that pushed back on it? Okay, so that's good.
So it's still up in the
It's still up, yeah, so the answer is yes, it's regarding the lawsuit. Hopefully that will remain permanent, we'll see. I would bet that they're at the Vanguard being very cautious and not expecting that the money will be there. At least they can start to plan for that in a twisted way. So another grant, again, who knows whether it's still there or not, Worcester State University technically was canceled, we'll see. Collaborative research program for recruiting it's actually STEM professors. And so this was a $387,000 grant through the National Science Foundation. They've already received $122,000, and the plug got pulled. UMass, looking at HIV pre-exposure advances in vulnerable adolescents and emerging adults. It's a pretty important project. $667,000 committed, already got 434, so obviously more than halfway through the project, boom, plug it pulled. American Antiquarian Society, which is in Worcester, a great organization. They bring in scholars from around the country and around the world to do research at the AAS. This is a continuing grant, so they've received this every few years for a long, long time. $339,000 committed, they already got $110,000, plug it's full. And, all these things, I hope they come back. There are, that's 15,000 grants, 15,198 grants that have been canceled. The data is pretty hard to go through, but it's there if anyone's curious. I'll send you an Excel file, and that's it. And that was my last slide. I apologize for being sat down. I've got to learn how to include some jokes or find some good news. I was thrilled to find the good news about the Botanic Society growing. I hope that stays. I was very happy in preparation for this that I learned that the USGS office is staying. That seems like that's real. That one, I don't think that's in regards to a lawsuit. I think that the government just said, oh, this actually is important. Some Doge lacking just pulled the plug on it too early. Something like that. We'll see. What other questions can I answer? Okay, sure.
I just want to put this in perspective. This is something. Historically, Republican presidents want to have the Republican Party in general, they like smaller government because they don't want people to have to pay taxes. And that really primarily means the wealthiest among us and corporations. So all these cuts are being made. We won't really see the benefit of that. We'll see less services. We might not be able to get an electronic book at the library. And the whole purpose of this is for the richest among us to pay less taxes. And experts say that they'll pay 4% less in taxes, while the middle class and people in lower economic situations will pay 2.5% more in taxes. So this is what this is all about, and I just wanted to be clear about that.
Jim?
Did you want to come?
Oh.
I just wanted to mention something about the libraries.
Oh, please come to the mic.
I can repeat back if you'd rather.
Yeah, no, just something about the libraries. I mean, you put a lot of great things about the libraries give us, but for our members of our society that are homeless right now, we have seniors at home that don't have air conditioning, we have poor people that are not warm in the winter. The libraries give them a safe space to go, read, meet with their friends, use the bathroom. I mean, these sound like really basic stuff, but we have a huge homeless section of our society that we have to remember. We also have a lot of residents that are food insecure. So getting them, a lot of people don't even have a computer. I know it's hard for us to believe that, but at libraries and other places you can go and use the Wi-Fi, use the computer to fill out your applications, get information, share information. So we just have to remember what libraries actually give us. Is it a level playing field? It's a safe space. And a lot of the community does not have that. So I just wanted to remind that, and I'm respectfully reminding people that are going to watch that, because I don't have to remind anybody here in this room of this. This is not for any of you who've been out here fighting for people that can't fight for themselves. And this is, anyway, so it's not for you. It's just for people that might be listening to this in the future.
So at the beginning of that, you mentioned something really important about people going to libraries for cooling or heating or anything else. So during the crazy heat that we had a few days ago, Northborough Library was the official cooling center. So they were specifically inviting people in who, their homes or wherever they were just a little too hot. They could come to our library and take advantage of the air conditioning there. So thank you for bringing that up.
Is this on?
Yes.
I know it feels kind of stiff to have to come up here to ask a question, the rest, but we are taping this. We want to have access for folks down the road to be able to, hear what we are concerned about and our comments and our education. So please come up, or I can go around and I'll hold on to this and I'll run and give it to you. Here you go.
Hold on to it.
I just want to interject before anybody starts to leave. I'm excited to say there's some new people here, and usually I'm really good about collecting email addresses. So thank you to everybody for coming. If somebody is not on our email list to get our newsletter, I hope that you'll let me know. Just give me your email address before you leave, so we'll put you down. And if you don't happen to do that, you can also find out about the meetings that we're having on our Facebook page at facebook.com/indivisible.gain. I think that's what it is, right? That's it.
Thank you. So many good points, Mitch. This is so good. So first of all, one of the things that drives me nuts about government waste, that phrase, okay? One of the slides you had up was about the HIV program being funded, and I believe, if you could pull it up, that would be great, because $434,384 have already been provided, which means that those funds have already been spent. That program is gone. It's done. It's over. When you do a scientific program and you don't finish the program, you have accomplished absolutely nothing. You've just wasted $434,384 worth of taxpayer money. And the other piece of this that drives me nuts is you've already kind of gone over this too, Mitch, is they always talk about these things as spending. This is them hiring people in our communities. This is them giving you and you and you and your uncle and your cousin and your son and your nephew jobs. That's what the money is, right? $434,384,000. Botch that number, but that money was funding scientists, and it was funding the rent for the building that is taxpayer funded, that is supporting the town. It's not waste. And when you take that away, who commutes to work? All right, we've got a few people. Do any of you have an opportunity to work remotely, or would you lose your job? You'd lose your job. Some of you would lose your job So if I said, hey, we're just going to cut your car. We're just going to cut that part of your budget. That doesn't save money. That costs you your job. That's what we're talking about. We're costing taxpayers money by supposedly saving the federal government money. It's insane. Two other things that I wanted to point out. I don't know exactly how this program that I'm about to talk about was funded, but the city of Worcester is part of a pilot program from the federal government where all students of their school system receive free lunch. And during the summers, they get, there are two things that happen. One, every family of a student gets SNAP benefits. So you actually get a food stamp card. And the other thing is they have these, at certain playgrounds and parks, they actually have people come and bring food, and anyone under 18 can have access to that food. Now, I suspect Republicans would say that this is wasteful socialism. But there's a couple of things with that. First of all, I don't think feeding kids is socialism. I think feeding kids is what would make America great. If I went somewhere else and they said, hey, do you have hungry kids in your country? And I said, oh yeah, and they'd say, well, you're not a very good country. Touche. Okay. But ignoring all that, because they're maybe heartless human beings, let's talk about money. The employees who make the student lunches, that's a low-paying job. It's not, I mean, teacher is not a great-paying job, but your lunch food service is a much lower-paying job. They would only have jobs 9 months out of the year if it were not for this additional program that allows them to distribute food to kids in the parks. Okay, so you'd have to lay off a significant amount of people, and you'd have a significant amount of turnover, and you'd have to retrain those people. This provides stability for the communities. And that isn't in DOJ's data. The second piece to it is, when Worcester went to remote learning in COVID, all the schools were closed down. Those SNAP benefits went out to the entire community. Anyone who had kids in Worcester Public School now had SNAP benefits the entire duration of that shutdown. And what happened was a couple of things. One, there was a community movement encouraging people to take that, I don't remember what the number was, maybe $380 a month, okay, and spend it at your local restaurants. To order out in your local restaurants. Hey, you're getting SNAP benefits that, a lot of families may need, but a lot of families may not need. Spend that money in the local restaurants. Worcester had fewer restaurants per capita go out of business during that set of years than most of the rest of Massachusetts and indeed most of the country. Because people were spending that extra money specifically to help out restaurants. And people were donating the SNAP benefits if they didn't need them. Some people were donating the SNAP benefits. So the macroeconomic data is missing from all of the DOJ data, right? Just because that you save $1, yeah, but what did that dollar do? And none of that is in the DOJ data at all.
I want to wrap up my part of this because, Leslie, do you want to come up and say a few things?
Yeah. I want to say a few things about the topic first.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
So I work with blind and visually impaired kids, their families, and the educators who teach them. And they're 75% of kids who have a visual impairment at this point also have an additional disability, some of which are very complex, often from birth, and require almost full-time caretaking. These children will never be independent. So the families are dependent on not only the services of the school system or the specialized school that they attend, but vocational rehabilitation services that are designed to create employment or community engagement options. Now, those options have been reduced significantly over the last few years, and parents are left holding the bag for designing their children's life once they graduate by age 22 from high school services. Those are entitlement services, and our wraparound often with OT, PT, speech language pathology, all the things that create access to the world for a student with a visual impairment and additional disabilities. Once that goes away, put yourself in those families' shoes. It's heartbreaking to think that they are being deprived of those opportunities to gain additional support, to create a plan that is meaningful, and to have appropriate, safe places for those children to go, young adults to go as they age out of the school system. So I just want to put, it's intersected with state services that get drop-down funding from the feds, as well as into our K-12 system. The program I usually have somewhat halfway filled by now is not filled because all the states that we typically see kids from are acting as I predicted, highly conservatively with their state level funding that would otherwise fund our high impact direct service virtual programming for students, educators, and parents. So I just want to paint a picture of the complex drop-down, trickle-down effect for human beings in their homes, terrified about how to support their children. So anyhow, just my little contribution. That said, Mitch wants to finish,
Yep,
and then I'll hand
just
this.
close out, and I apologize, if somebody on the video sees me smiling during what Leslie was talking about, I wasn't smiling at that. Our teenage daughter came in again. My wife, that's what teenagers do. Thank you very, very much for sitting through what I know was boring or chaotic or scary or worrisome information. I hope that we learned something. I certainly did from some of the comments back today. This is, every day, this is changing every day. This is, some days getting a little worse, some days getting a little better. I know at 5 o'clock, we're hoping to have a number of people outside. We've got a couple of pieces of business to take care of before that. If anyone has any questions, wants a copy of the presentation, wants the DOE spreadsheets, anything like that, reach out to me. My email address is up there at mitch@mitchcohen.com. I'm really easy to find in Northborough. Usually you just see me walking around town sometime. But thank you very much, everyone.